It's spring update time and there's lots in this one. Hi, welcome back to Chadwick Model Railway. I'm Charlie and let's get straight on with the spring update on the layout. And so for a little bit of a build update. This is the January board, all complete bar the tracks that run across. This is the February board and this progress is going well here. The points are in, got a bit of work to do underneath. And just as a recap, here's the buildings. There's the newish Bachmann shed over there, sort of a late 60s, early 70s design, will fit in well with this. There's the very old steam 4-lane shed here. Nice construction from Bachmann. A Nightwing fuel unit and a Bachmann, wash plant. And over there's another Bachmann 2-lane shed. There's obviously other buildings to go around here, infrastructure, office buildings, support buildings and that sort of stuff. Now, I don't know if you're aware, I live down here in deepest, darkest Somerset. We don't get out much really, but the Bath and West Showground is nearby, and once every couple of months they have a toy and train fair. And I tend to go there as an early bird and see if I can pick up a bargain. Well, guess what? So I went there one Sunday morning and I got this little Bachmann single road loco shed. There's one similar in Swindon, or there was back in the early 70s, well before that even, and also I think I've seen pictures of one at King's Cross, very similar. £24, I think I got it for either 22 or 20. Nice shed, I like that. And when I was visiting one of my daughters over in Wales, I went to Lord and Butler. I like to go to model railway shops and buy stuff because it keeps model railway shops going, because if we don't go to model railway shops and you just buy it online, all the shops go broke. So I bought this Bachmann fueling point and I like this as well. They go well together. And so in true Charlie style, this can go. And that will appear at our summer show on a stall, no doubt. It's a bit big for eBay really. And I can install this shed and this wash plant, the Nightwing supporting it on the other side, and wherever this, the fueling point, another fuel point and the wash plant, and it sort of looks better. Sometimes less is more and it's not so cluttered. And when you look at real life photos of TMDs, they are a huge area. It's not all just crammed in. I am fortunate because obviously I've got a little bit of space. Okay. It all sort of makes sense then. I've got two lines coming off here and these will go into this refuel area. I've got two lines coming off here. One will go to the shed, another one and these will go down there. And then we're into the Bachmann shed, which I need to take a closer look at. I acquired a West Hill Wagon Works Modern Image Depot interior kit. Lovely piece of kit. And there it is. It's sort of loosely assembled. Ready to go for this shed to sit on top. But another couple of issues with this little shed is the point structure that feeds down to it. Because we have the double slip and then it feeds on to a right hand point, and then the right hand point, then the lines go into the shed as you might expect. However, that's not necessarily the best way of looking at it. But with the shed now in position and that right hand point feeding into it, means that one track comes down and goes straight into here, but the other one has to take quite a sharp turn. Well, perhaps in reality, I won't use the P word, that point should be a medium Y. So both points make a small divergence to get into the shed, which to me makes more sense. So I shall switch that point out, because it's not glued in or anything, it's just in place, for a Y. Which then moves this shed slightly because obviously it doesn't come so far this way. So I've drawn out here on the track plan where I need to cut a hole, because I have a West Hill Wagon Works kit which I acquired at Ali Pali, I think it was last year, and that needs to be sunk in, the cork removed, and then this cut a hole and put in, and then this kit then will obviously sit smack bang on top and look rather dashing. So that's an extra job that I have to do to this board before I can sort of really commission it. And I think one other thing worth thinking about before I whip these boards off and put all the point motors, which I'm not going to bore you to death with, but I do need to run the cables that will light these buildings and come up with a new cable colouring strategy, because basically the whole layout is wired in red and black cables for, you know, sort of 14 to 16 volts DCC. So the shed will probably be lit with 3 volts DC, and along with this shed here, and I'm sure the wash plant will get a couple of LEDs and all that sort of stuff, as will the old Nightwing kits. So I've got to come up with a wiring strategy and do that at the same time while this board's out before it finally goes back in. So as you can see, I've changed things around for a change, but I think, in all honesty, I think these are changes for the better. Yeah, and then obviously you probably don't realise this, these 2 tracks will go around here. This is a head shunt for the refuel depot. This one is the reverse loop that goes right around and disappears under a hillside, which will come in this area here, and there'll be a little road network around in this area, and probably an access road across through obviously a level crossing through here to get heavier traffic in. So that's my kind of big picture stuff. Now we now have a little leap forward in time, because we are post the mistakes video and the installation of the large screen. So that kind of brings you up to date. A couple of questions were asked about the screen, about the cables. Well, on the shelves, the power cable runs off in that direction and the HDMI cable runs off in that direction behind those buildings on those shelves. But what do we do with the HDMI cable to bring it down? Excuse me. Well, what I bought was some plastic waste pipe from a well-known store, B&Q, Block and Quail. So what I'm going to do is cut a quarter section out of it, and then that should fit over the cable corner of the layout. It'll just be painted with white emulsion, and then some of the back scene pasted over the top of it, and hopefully be hidden by farm buildings and trees and the like. Now I think it's worth going through a couple of these components individually so you can sort of follow my thought process, as it were. And we'll start with these 3 tanks here. This is a bulk fuel installation. It's nothing to do with the TMD. It just so happens that the fuel is delivered by rail. And it's interesting when you compare the scale of these storage tanks to the one made by Bachmann. And here it is. I picked it up on eBay a few weeks ago. This one's been through the wars a little bit, but it shows you the scale from a, let's say, a ready use fuel supply to something more specialised. And one lesson with these things, if you're thinking of having a bulk fuel installation or a smaller one to that end, is you shouldn't have them at the end of the tracks, because naturally, if you get a runaway train, you're going to have a major disaster on your hands. So the lines, your railway lines should not line up with your storage tanks. Now another thing worth mentioning is this little 2-lane shed here, because I originally planned it, this line here would come straight and it would be sort of at this type of angle here, which meant it would be quite close to the retaining wall that I'm going to put along here, and also in front of it there'd be very limited access, and if I wanted to sort of put a vehicle around the back or whatever, it really didn't work. So I sort of reconfigured it and I put it in to go kind of like that, and now there's sort of a walkway between the TMD approach line and the side of this building, and adequate clearance should we need to sort of put a couple of delivery wagons out between the retaining wall and the building. So this works. Now whilst we're on the subject of this shed, I've got a little bit of a confession to make. You see, when I'd installed this point, the board was upside down and it was just the points I was working on, and installed the point motors and all the wiring. However, now we're up the right way, and when I went to lay the track, I noticed that it was actually a code 75 medium radius electrofrog point. and clearly I'm on code 100. So if you look there to the right hand side, you can see a code 100 to code 75 converter piece. And then the two tracks that run into the shed are also code 75. Well, does that make any difference? Well, not really, only that the old Lima stock with its pizza cutter wheels will struggle on those tracks. And over the other side of the board, I'd also made a mistake with this right hand point here, because I'd wired it wrong. You know, normally I'm black to the back, but for some reason it was the other way around. And of course what had happened is I'd actually wired this up to go where the Y point is for the 2-lane Bachmann engine shed. So putting the Y point in, it was clearly this became redundant, so I just popped it in here and then realised, no, take it out, Charlie, quick rewire back in. It's only a few minutes work. I mean, it wasn't glued down or anything, so no big deal. And another error which I pointed out during that mistakes video was this tortoise point motor, which I hadn't really taken into consideration that it was lying in the path of the upline on the Helix. Clearly it couldn't stay there. And as you can see here, I've installed one of the MP5 point motors, which are much more shallow, which will allow a passage of train underneath without it impinging on its travel. And this is the point motor that I will cover in one of the Chadwick Swifts in a week or two's time. Now, we spoke earlier about this Bachmann shed and the Westhill Wagon Works interior. So as you can see, I cut a large hole in this baseboard. I think this cork is 3mm, but once I'd cut that out, this was sinking in too deeply, so I then put a piece of 1mm plastic card to line around, and then this then sits at a much better level. So it does sink into the cork underlay and looks much better. So that's the way ahead with that, and I just need to now connect those two lines from that Y point to come up to here. Now, I've had a few inquiries asking me to do surface mounted point motors, and as you may or may not be aware, I'm a lover of tortoise point motors. So to that end, here's that Y point I mentioned earlier, and I have not removed the spring clip. But what I have here is the cables to both operate the point, the point itself, to switch the frog, and to provide feedback into train controller that the point motor has finished its travel. Hence there's so many cables. So my intention on one of the Chadwick Swifts forthcoming is to install an MP5 point motor on the surface to operate this point, because underneath I couldn't fit a tortoise point motor anyway because of the proximity to the Helix, and then finding some building or other, obviously we need to disguise it. So this will be covered in a forthcoming Swift video. Now, I mentioned in a previous video, and there should be a link to it here, about installing electromagnet KD uncouplers. And there are two here underneath these two pieces of silver paper. Here I have a small rake of mobile tankers. So what I hope to do now everything's in and that track is not pinned, but it's glued down, is run these tankers back, and just to check out that the uncoupling performs as advertised, let's say. Now, underneath the silver paper here is the KD electromagnet uncoupler. So if I bring up my shunter with its small rake of tankers and stop the shunter with the first tanker just here. So start to slow it down now. Then I reverse the direction of the shunter, and if I press function 9, the shunter should do a shuffle whilst I press the solenoid button on the console. And there we are, as simple as that. The shuffle is carried out because it's got an ESU decoder, though other decoders have such facilities. It's certainly not a fail-safe system. It kind of uncouples 9 times out of 10, but it's certainly better than other systems that I've tried. I've just noticed from the edit there that my eyes are very red, and it's because of the time of year. It's tree pollen, I'm afraid, and they do make my eyes somewhat sore and itchy. Right, enough of me. And now I'm about to start putting the droppers on these last few tracks and then gluing them in with copy decks. But before I do that, it's one other point really, and that's the services that are apparently offered by these commodities. Because if you now look closely at the back of the loco shed, you can see that there are services provided, such as water, and there's a small electrical cabinet. So it does imply that if you put a track next to it and a loco on it, they can do stuff, let's say. So it is worth thinking about what you're going to put and where. And then similarly, on the back of this fueling unit, there is nothing. So we can't take fuel on the other side, but there are guardrails there to stop someone walking off and being hit by locomotives that are running into that little engine shed. So it's worth thinking about what you're doing before you sort of come into your final plan. So I'll now get these tracks wired with their droppers and get them glued down and put some weights on them overnight, and I'll get back to you in the morning. And when I say I'll see you tomorrow morning, what I really meant was tomorrow afternoon, because this morning I spent most of it underneath baseboards, carrying on with monotonous hours of wiring, while imitating a very overweight limbo dancer. Well, it's all looking rather embryonic, but I have just plonked those buildings back in their respective places and added a handful of locos. All the track is down, pinned, glued and wired, bar the bits going into the backman shed, where you can see that class 22 and 47 over on the right hand side. But it sort of gives the spirit of it, and it seems to look reasonably decent. Of course, the atmosphere is missing, isn't it, from the scenics, the people, the commotion of a TMD. But in general terms, it's looking a lot more respectable, let's say. Of course, once all the track bed is down and ballasted, and you know the tones and the weathering added, I think we could be onto a winner. It does look as if it's got a reasonable amount of potential. I think it fits the bill that I'm after. But let's be perfectly honest, we're only halfway there, really, aren't we? There is so much more to put on a TMD. Anyway, I hope it's given you a few tips if you're developing one of your own, and hopefully you'll learn from some of the mistakes that I've made. Now, I mentioned earlier at the start of the video about running the DC cables, whether it be for 12 volts or 3 volts DC, to light the LEDs that run throughout this section of the layout. And of course, all the buildings will need to be lit, and then of course there's yard lights and everything else to be put in. I've actually bought the yard lights at a previous show, but of course I'm not going to put them in. They're probably the last thing that I wish to install, because you know, doing the balancing and everything, these are the sort of things that are going to get knocked down. In some ways it's similar with signals, but obviously the signals are really good at the throat of the layout, the throat of this board. But again, I tend to put them in at the end, because there's no point in buying the signals, installing, then changing your track plan and finding your signals don't work, and I've done that before. But finding out where you need to establish your signals, and of course the ground signals and all that sort of stuff, is really to wait until the layout, or that section of the layout, is beyond its embryonic stage, and this is where it is now. I think we're quite happy with the track plan of where everything lays out. Of course, we've got the hillside to go in here, which will kind of change the look of it. But getting back to the 12 volts DC and 3 volts DC, these are the only two colours of single colour cable that I haven't used, which is orange and grey. So I will probably use those for the 12 volt DC power, and I'll light these videos, I'll light these buildings in a separate video and show you what's on the market, because there are some really good stuff coming available. So there we go. Like, it is a little bit of a pain, but it brings it to life. But a word of caution, of course, you go and see layouts, especially at shows, and you know, it's bright daylight and they've got all these fascinating LEDs on, and you think, well, if it's daylight, why would you want so much light? Whereas if you run your layout in subdued lighting, then that's really when the yard lights and the loco lights and the coach lighting, that's really when it all comes to life. So I'm going to install the building lights that are going to be dimmable. So they're not necessarily too bright, but trying to put resistors into every single light to get it to the right sort of feel was actually, you can turn the voltage down from say 12 volts to 9 volts or 3 to 1.5 to get your the lights at the right level. So that's the thing that I will cover in the next couple of months. Now it is of course worth talking about the next stage, which is this board here, which goes around the far end there, which takes these tracks that come from the fuel depot and the reverse loop right around the outside and under the hillside and back out into the main layout. So there is some, what would you call it? Carpentry to be done. Wish me luck. So there we are, and I do hope you found it interesting. As per usual, I'd like to thank the patrons, and if you'd like to become one and watch this ad-free, then there's the button to do so. There's the subscribe button and a video here and here. See you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.